be quick enough. Well, I'm wondering how we've managed to get through 6 minutes. They've both been down twice. Well, but you've got to score both the rounds level, haven't you?
I think you have. I think they're both 10-10 on the cards. Both of them.
Don't worry about the scorecards. They're going to be purely academic.
Down goes Fraser! Down goes Fraser! Down goes Fraser!
This should be the round of the century.
Look at Holyfield! What a warrior!
If he weighs 205, his heart weighs about 204.
It happened. It happened. I can't believe it. That was astonishing, and he hurts him with a hook. Corrales comes back a straight right. Now Castillo against the ropes. Unbelievable. Ebb and flow. Corrales fighting. Castillo's in trouble. Leach steps in, and the fight is over. Corrales with a remarkable dramatic turnaround to win this fight.
If he gets up, he probably wins the fight. I can't believe it!
Unbelievable! Richard Steele stopped the fight with fewer than 5 seconds to go. You're going to watch Lou Duva go crazy now. You're going to watch Lou Duva go absolutely berserk.
Well, hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Punches from the Past. My name is Steve Wellings and I'm joined by Dave Lee, Andy Patterson and Kurt Ward for another episode where we delve into the historical archives and take a look at a fight from yesteryear that we really enjoyed or something that left an imprint on the sport's long, rich history. This week we're going to the Wythenshawe Forum in Manchester, Lancashire, a little bit less glamorous than some places we visited in the past, but it's the Ezra Sellers-Carl Thompson fight, an absolute cracker, with Thompson fighting for his International Boxing Organisation World Cruiserweight title. And this was back in 2001, November 2001. Dave Lee, I think you're going to start us off, actually. Carl Thompson coming into this one, we all knew what we were getting with him, really. He'd a bit of a knockout artist, come from behind guy, a bit vulnerable, but he could knock you out, but he could get knocked out himself as well at the same time. And as for Sellers, slick boxer, very vulnerable as well, but a big puncher. They put these two together in a bit of a nondescript setting, but it really did deliver fireworks.
Yeah, perfect descriptions of the two guys. I mean, Thompson, what can you say about him? I suppose my first memory of Thompson was when he fought Ralph Raccagiani, brother, of course, of Graziano, for the vacant WBO Cruiserweight title. And it really summed up Thompson and, set the template for the rest of his career. He had great success during the fight, but he found himself on the canvas, I think, something like 3 times during it. And the last knockdown, he ended up dislocating his shoulder, and Raccagiani picked up the belt that way. But it was later reversed in Germany. Thompson picked up a points victory to score the WBO title. But as you said, real warrior. Always been an underappreciated fighter as well, I think. Especially certainly domestically he was. I mean, he never really got the recognition he deserved when you consider some of the thrilling fights he's been involved in with the likes of Eubank. The first fight with Eubank in particular, which I still argue is one of the best fights of the 90s. I mean, if anybody who's listening to this hasn't seen it, definitely check that out. It's a great fight. He had, wars with the likes of Terry Dunstan, Sebastian Rotten was another classic. The aforementioned Ralph Raccagiani, David Hay, of course, and the Sellers fight, which we're going to take a look at today. I mean, even when he beat Eubank, that should have been the launch pad for him, but no one gave him any credit for the victory. They just talked about Eubank's bravery and, the Eubank story where, at the time, well, in the 90s, a lot of people hated Eubank. He was the pantomime villain. But after the Calzaghe defeat and especially the Thompson loss, everyone went from hating Eubank to loving him. And that overshadowed what should have been Thompson's night. I think Thompson himself is very bitter about that. He discussed that recently. coming off this. He was coming off as well a few fights before the Sellers fight. He lost his WBO title, which he had won from Makajani to Johnny Nelson in what I would call a desperately premature stoppage when you consider Thompson's amazing power of recuperation. I mean, his legs weren't even gone, and he was protesting. He was following, I think it was Paul Thomas who was refereeing, I believe, and he was following all around the ring, screaming at him, saying, "What were you doing?" I mean, it was a shocking stoppage. I mean, to be fair, Nelson was well on top, but Jesus, how many times have we seen Thompson turn things around in his career? And he should have been afforded the opportunity to do this here. Speaking of Sellers, himself, he was in some up and down wars as well, wasn't he? I mean, I remember he had an absolute thrilling battle with Alex Stewart, if you remember him, and that was up a heavyweight. And I think there was something like 7 knockdowns in 3 rounds, and Stewart ended up winning it. Interesting fighter, Sellers. I didn't notice, but he had his debut against Bruce Seldon of all people, who was 5-0 at the time. I mean, that's an out from the past, Bruce Seldon, but so Sellers, as you said, vulnerable, big punching, and basically what you had here was 2 guys, 2 big punchers, and 2 guys who were chinny. I mean, it was the recipe for a great fight, which is what we got.
Yeah, and you just mentioned the 2 fighters, 2 big guys who both like to bang hard, both leave their chins up in the air. It makes for a perfect fight. But what just added to it was Steve Smoger reffing it as well, because there was going to be no premature stoppage here. Thompson, as we saw against Sebastian Ruffman, where he was down a few times, he was badly behind on the cards, and he came back to score the knockout win. He's the type of fighter who, if a ref is going to look on, if remember when we saw Enzo Maccarinelli be prematurely stopped against Elvin McKenzie, and the ref obviously knew his history and stopped it. Well, if the refs do that, Carl Thompson is the type of fighter where they've got to give him the benefit of the doubt, because he's done it so many times. He's a fighter who gets put down, and he's got like that Evander Holyfield type recovery where he's down and then he's straight back up and he's fighting again, and his heart just takes over. And with Steve Smoger as ref, it was just going to be, unless the guy was absolutely down and out and couldn't move, this fight was going to go until one guy couldn't go anymore, and that's exactly what happened.
And as you said there, Kurt, he reminded me of Nigel Benn in the sense, Thompson, that he was actually at his most dangerous when he was hurt, wasn't he?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he didn't get the appreciation he should have got, and he was a guy who, if you're a boxing fan who goes to a lot of shows, you can pay for all these big fights and whatever. But Carl the Cat Thompson was the type of fighter, if you paid your money, he's gonna get your money's worth, because he was gonna put it all on the line. And like you said, he didn't get the appreciation. He's the guy who gave David Hayes first loss when David Hayes was getting a lot of hype, coming up as a prospect. And I think he was 40 years old at the time, and he should get a lot of credit for that victory, because Hayes was young, he was fast, and he was really, the momentum was with him, and he stopped playing his tracks, and he didn't really get the credit he deserved. And like you said, with the Eubank fights, I mean, both of them are great fights as well, but you got 2 guys here who, I mean, if that's it's an interesting fight to do, because a lot of people might not have heard of Ezra Sellers. They might only know Thompson for maybe a Eubank fight, so it's good, and hopefully listeners will go and watch this fight, because it's just one of those fun fights that you can just watch time and time again.
Andy, I was just going to say, coming into this fight, as Dave has alluded to, if you look at Thompson's record after he lost controversially to Johnny Nelson, he'd had a right good little run of knockout wins. Vacant British Cruiserweight title, knockout win over Terry Dunstan. Then he'd knocked out Alan Simon for the European title, defended it against a Russian, and then a win over Uriah Grant, who was decent, but it pretty much passed it at that time, to pick up this IBO title. So he came in on pretty good form, all said and done.
Yeah, you did, mate. I mean, I suppose what we did know going into the fight was that both fighters we knew punched like mules, but they were somewhat vulnerable. But you see, he did have a good run of wins, and obviously the winner of this fight was really getting lined up for a shot at Johnny Nelson's WBO title. Sellers, he was never really, as Dave alluded to, he was never really a heavyweight, although he had some, a couple of good wins up at heavyweight, as you say, the aforementioned Alex Stewart. But the fight itself, it was really exciting, first round. If you look at it, to start off with as such, because I think both of them are kind of stalking more on the outside. Sellers looking to kind of land a massive right hook, and Thompson using lots of body movement and feints to try and offset it. And then a minute left, in the round, Sellers then clipped Thompson a right hook that, really just kind of knocked him off balance as such, But I did think as well as that Sellers did think that Thompson was more hurt, so really did try to kind of force the action and try and kind of get the job done early. Then he just basically turned to tide Thompson and kind of caught him a massive right hook that dropped him heavily in the seat of his pants. Just get into the round two as well. Both again, I think were dropped in that round. Thompson was dropped by two right hands that probably landed behind the back of the head. But then Thompson gets back up again, as I says, pure warrior instinct. Just comes back and he hurts him, lands a right hand that basically drops Sellers. Sellers looked in a bad way. I don't know if anybody noticed it, but Smogan again helped his countryman back to the corner a little bit, I did think, after the second round. But then I think Ian Darke as well was a bit of a savage, actually. It was good to hear Darke on the commentary of this fight, actually.
He was great for that fight, yeah.
It was actually, because he just says he had this kind of savage, evil laugh about him, about the knockdowns. He says he's disappointed after the third round because there was only one knockdown in the third round.
He was loving it, wasn't he, Ian Darke? Because the strange thing was, guys, I don't know what you thought, but coming into the first round, given the way the fight turned out, the beginning of the fight was actually quite dull. It was really, really quiet. You could hear their boots banging off the canvas. Sellers was really tricky, very circumspect back against the ropes. He was almost running at times, and it was a real dull sort of fight that exploded into life, and every time they hit each other, they just seemed to hurt each other.
Very, very tentative start. I mean, it's actually quite rare that you would see a fight be so quiet and dull that ends up as an absolute mini classic, which what we got. I thought early on, the southpaw stance of Sellers was, causing Thompson problems. And I think the story of the fight, as Andy kind of alluded to there, every time Sellers went for Thompson, he ended up getting shinned, didn't he? or rocked.
Exactly. See, I was just going to mention that. Well, I don't know if you want to go straight into the kind of stoppage or whatever, but it was just the actual knockdowns himself. I mean, how they kind of kept going. I did think as well after the first round, I thought probably Sellers looked the more worse for wear. As I say, I don't think the first knockdown on Thompson actually hurt him at that point. But I did think
that wasn't it.
It was a great shot. But I think, as you say, Dave, because Sellers being the southpaw, it probably did open him up for Thompson's counter when he came back up in the first round too, because it did look more like a right hook, and obviously Sellers being a southpaw was more open to the shot, and the way it landed, you did think at that point Sellers was probably the more hurt of the two.
But it's amazing as well. Sorry, Kurt, go on.
No, I was just going to say quickly, I watched it again earlier today, and it was actually, if you were in the crowd watching it or watching it live on Sky, after the first minute, you would have thought that Sellers was a typical foreigner who was brought over and was just not going to throw. He was just there to survive, because he just kept circling and circling and circling. You could hear his boots banging on the mat. He didn't throw, and actually clocked it. He threw his first punch with 150 left of the round, so he spent like the whole minute basically just circling, doing nothing. And it exploded inside. I think the difference in the fight was that Sellers, he might not have looked it, but he had extremely fast hands for quite a big guy, and when he threw quite explosive combinations, and they all landed because Thompson's defence was pretty much not there, and that was just the difference. But as Dave said earlier about the Nigel Benn reference, it was true in this case, because both times Sellers was badly hurt and put down was when he actually had Thompson hurt and down himself, and he just went all out trying to get the knockout. Both times, the first two knockdowns for Sellers are basically exactly the same. It's him being caught with the right hand, walking into the right hand as he's trying to unload himself, and it's basically a mirror image of each other. So after 2 rounds, both guys have been down twice.
Put in his debut all those years ago with Bruce Seldon, and a right hand puts Thompson on the floor. There's the power, and he gets up, looks okay. He was up at a count of about 4, had to take a mandatory 8, but that's not a good start for Thompson. This fellow has lights out sort of power, this Ezra Sellers, and Thompson has already felt it, and there's a right back. Well, what a fight we're going to have here, I think. And Sellers is in a much, much worse way as he gets up. And Smoker takes him back to the corner. The bell, I think, went in the middle of all that. It's the end of the round.
The second knockdown from Sellers, even though the bell probably saved him, I still think that a couple of British referees might have waved it off because he tried to get up and he seemed to wobble all over the place, and then he was helped back to his corner. And I think some British refs might have waved it off, but Smoger being Smoger, Ezra, he could still stand, so Smoger was going to push him back out there.
Now in the middle of it, Sellers finds time to showboat and then floors Thompson again. There was a big chopping right this time. Thompson looks very unsteady, dizzy and dazed this time. And there's still nearly a minute left in the round. Now Thompson got up quickly from the knockdown in the other round, but I think this time he's not so good.
No, he's not. He's dazed there. Another big left hand.
Oh, would you believe it? Back he comes to floor the American again. This is quite unbelievable. It's an incredible fight.
Well, the crowd on their feet with this one, Ian.
And there's still 27 seconds left in the round, and another right hand from Thompson. Is that going to do it for him? Now Zeller stands there, and would you believe it, plays bottom. Amazing stuff. And an uppercut from Thompson. Again, his eyes are in orbit, Sellers, as it landed, but somehow he's still on his feet. The bell is coming up, but will it be...
It was the type of fight that needed Smoger as the referee to let it flow, wasn't it?
It absolutely did, because if you look at it going into the fourth, I think it was Thompson's trainer, I think it's Morris Corey's name was, he's basically pleading, just, with Thompson, just to kind of concentrate, just before the start of the fourth round, and, just we talk about Sellers, as Kurt mentioned, he never really kind of threw much for like the first minute or two, but then surprisingly, rather than go to war, he just actually came out and he's tried to kind of more box on the back foot and try and pick his man off. It's just with the southpaw jab. Thompson, I think, desperately tried to get a land. I did think he desperately tried to kind of land that heavy shot to try and basically take him out. But was it a left? Was it? No, was it? It was a right hook, I think. It was. I think Thompson tried to kind of lean him with a jab, and then let's try and get my notes up here.
The finishing shot, Andy.
Aye, finishing shot. Aye,
right hook, wasn't it?
Right hook. I mean,
he'd been landing that all night, hadn't he? Yeah.
That was an evil shot. It was an evil knockout, evil ending.
Big fights on the continent. He gets a countering right hand as he looked to land his own. Now this is serious. Thompson is down. I don't think he's going to make it this time. It's waved over. The count only got to 6. Steve Smoger says no more. Carl Thompson is knocked out. He's lost his championship. And in the battle of 6 knockdowns, in the end, the final nail goes into Carl Thompson. The American has won, and he was never going to get up from that.
No, he wasn't. That was a really...
This one was like pinpoint accurate, wasn't it? And the way Thompson, his legs just collapsed from under him. He was never going to beat the count in a million years.
But what I liked, the way he went down, I mean, his legs just gave under him. He kind of got caught under his legs the way he went down. But what I liked was Smoger actually counted. Then at 8, he said, no, that's enough. So he gave him 8 seconds, but you could see clearly that he was absolutely out. But I think...
Respect for mate. That was respect here, because I think Smoger though. Smoger's watching 2 guys put out on the line. They've both scored knockdowns. They're both in the fight. You got to give him that chance to get back up.
Yeah, I think with Sellers though, the way he boxed. I know he's from Pensacola in Florida. He's a friend of Roy Jones, but the way he boxed, he seemed to have quite a bit of something about him. I don't know if he was a bit like Darnell Boone, where he was just thrown here, there, everywhere, not much training, because he definitely seemed to have some talent about him, the way he boxed. Like you said, he could go to war, or he could go on that back foot and just pick a guy off. And you mentioned his fight with Alex Stewart there. I mean, that fight he probably should have won. He had Alex Stewart all over the place, and he just didn't really have the finish in him, and he let Stewart back in the fight. But he seemed to have something about him, and it's he's another one, a bit like Carl Thompson, a great guy to watch in fun fights, but just didn't seem to have the talent to push on.
Yeah, it struck me, Kurt, in the few fights I've seen of Sellers, that he looks like a guy who fell in love with his power a bit too much, especially in this fight. As I mentioned, the southpaw stance was causing Thompson problems. His overall boxing ability was causing Thompson kittens. But when he dropped Thompson, he ran into a right hand, and if there was about 30, 40 seconds left in the round, I don't think Sellers would have survived the opening round.
Yeah, I know what you mean there, mate. I do know what you mean there.
Badly hurt. And it's funny because the second round when he got dropped, Sellers, it was the exact same punch. Exact same punch
Exact
Thompson
same,
had him
mate.
with. Because I'll tell you, I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but I always got the impression with Thompson that so even though he's hurt, a lot of the times he kind of overplays how hurt he is to kind of set traps for the opponent. I
Or
remember
he seems to have
I
terrible
remember when
balance as well.
Yeah,
yeah, but
rocking.
I remember when he fought Eubank the first time. There was one stage in the fight where he was badly hurt
Yeah.
and his legs went and his hands dropped. And the referee was about to jump in, and Thompson kind of looked at the referee, gave him a wink as to say, "I'm not that badly hurt. I'm just trying to like lure Eubank in." And Eubank didn't fall for it because he stood off. So I
Yeah.
think there's times there where Thompson's kind of playing possum just to kind of lure the fighter into
And
his
I
traps.
think that the thing with something like Thompson as well is people say, he was chinny. But you got to remember, when a guy's got basically no defence and his chin's in the air, I mean, if you look at the whole of his career, yeah, he gets dropped a lot and he suffered stoppage losses. But for a guy who gets hit as much as he did, I mean, he withstood a lot of punishment as well in a lot of fights. So, he might have been the type who went down, but he got up as on a lot more occasions as well. He wasn't just a guy who got hit and was gone. He walked through a lot of punches that a lot of other chinny fighters wouldn't have got through. And like this fight, I mean, the finishing blow, I mean, that would have finished off anyone.
The British Matthew Said Mohammed, mate.
Yeah,
Fair
yeah,
fight.
yeah. Probably a less talented version of Matthew Saad Mohammed, a guy who would get hit a lot and would give the fans the money worth. That's a definite comparison.
Same with Sellers, though. I mean, you could say to me, again, we mentioned at the start of the show that he was a chinny banger or a wee bit like Carl Thompson, but even though he might have been limited, but he was a gutsy warrior, and he was probably, I would say he's definitely one of the nearly men, actually, because I think he proved he was probably on the world class level, maybe as an operator. And see, to be honest, he wasn't a type of fighter actually that you afforded or you could afford to be have a bad night or be past your peak. I really didn't think that because at the end of the day, I mean, Joy Nelson at that time as well as I think after that fight, Joy Nelson's probably riding the wave. He's undefeated for a fair length of time at this point, and he dropped Nelson in the fourth round.
He did, yeah.
And then again, I think he even Carl Thompson, as Kurt mentioned. No, sorry, Carl Thompson. He went on had another great war with that. Was it Sebastian Rothman?
Yeah, that's right. He was about to be knocked clean out, wasn't he? And then he banged Rothman out the blue. Remember that was on BBC.
Unbelievable, that one. But then again, as you say, Sellers again, the nearly man, Joy Nelson had him down in the fourth, got stopped in the eighth, then went up and fought for the IBF vacant title against Kelvin Davis and got stopped in eight. I think Sellers had been doing 3 times in that fight. Then he went in the next fight against O'Neill Bell for the IBF.
Good fighter, Bell, wasn't it?
Aye, second round knockout. It's probably a step too far from him. Just, as I say, probably no world class operator. Probably even slightly too generous there, but it was a guy. If he fought the world class guys, the world class guys had to be on the ball because he just never knew.
I think, like Darnell Boone, if you're good enough, you should beat him, and you probably will. But the odd occasion, he's going to catch someone, especially when he's a big puncher with a fast hand. Someone's going to take him like an up-and-coming prospect, a bit like David Hay with Carl Thompson. You're going to take him a bit lightly, maybe. You're going to, throw everything at him, and he's still going to be standing there, and then he's going to catch you. And that's the type of guy that Sellers was, and so was Thompson. And if you didn't give these guys respect, they're going to bang you out.
But as we mentioned here, and Kurt mentioned it, and I mentioned it as well. Sellers, he was deceptively cute, though, wasn't he?
Good boxer. Yeah.
He knew his way around the ring, Steve. Definitely. I mean, even as Andy mentioned there, he dropped Johnny Nelson in the fourth round. Now, Nelson gets a lot of stick, but one thing Nelson was very elusive. So to drop Nelson, kind of shows you that he wasn't just some limited banger. He could pick his shots well. He knew his way around the ring. And as well as that, Sellers, we talk about Thompson's powers of recuperation, but what about Sellers? We've mentioned the Stewart fights where he was dropped himself several times and got up and didn't win the Stewart fight, but he had Stewart all over the place, as Kurt mentioned. And even in this fight, I mean, second round in particular, the second round is the round of the fight. If anyone's watching it, definitely check out the second round in particular. It's a great round. There was one moment there where Thompson had Sellers up against the ropes and he caught him with a right hand, and Sellers for a brief moment looked like he was actually out and done, but then he came back and stunned Thompson, so he was a fighter himself who like Thompson was very dangerous when he was hurt.
I think it was the third round where Thompson caught him with a big right hand and Sellers' legs, went to jelly again. Then after about 5 seconds that he got over it, then he started to do a little pose and stuck his tongue out as if to say it didn't hurt me, when it clearly his legs had just gone all over the place. So yeah, both guys, I think Sellers was just, he was the bigger puncher, I'd say, with the faster hands, but I think Thompson was getting to him more, and I don't think he was taking Thompson's shots as well as Thompson could until the ending. And it was one of those fights where you just wish it lasted a bit longer. I mean, it was never going to go 12; it was impossible. But a few rounds more. I mean, how many knockdowns would we have got?
I think it's criminal we never saw a rematch, though, isn't it?
Yeah, would have
I
been.
mean, I think it definitely warranted one. I mean, I know Johnny Nelson was ringside and was meant to fight the winner, but there's no reason why down the road these two couldn't have fought again. I'm sure it would have been another classic.
Yeah, I just think, at that point, as you say, I think that it would be 2004. I think you'd be looking at a potential rematch, because really, I think Sellers was really kind of then angling at world title level. He had Thompson fighting Rothman, and then he come back and fought David Haye. And he was then out the ring for over a year after the David Haye fight. So
yeah,
you don't know if maybe was he 40 at that time. Not be far off it anyway.
That, yeah. I remember Thompson's last fight was on the undercard of Hatton against Carlos Mosa.
That's right. I couldn't remember the Hatton opponent. I knew it was one of his shows. Yeah.
And I remember he was actually, even though he won widely on points on the scorecard, I thought he was quite fortunate myself.
He looked poor, didn't he, Dave, that night?
He looked very poor, Steve, and I think he retired shortly afterwards. So I think he knew himself that he wasn't performing. Yeah. He wasn't performing at the level he used to be operating at. So that fight convinced him to retire.
The thing with Sellers as well was that after the Bell fight, he was actually out the ring for 3-4 years after that. So
that's right,
in retirement. So I think if you're looking at a potential rematch here, then you would be looking round about after Sellers lost to Johnny Nelson back in 2002.
So yeah.
Again, as I say, probably, I think, what was Thompson? I think he hadn't even fought in 2002 as well. I think he went back to 6 rounders for a year and a bit, so before he even fought Rothman. So
yeah,
it is a shame. Maybe it's a victim of circumstances, maybe injury or whatever it is. But it's a shame it never happened again. But great fight nonetheless.
Yeah, I think post-fight, I was just going to mention there briefly the role of the IBO title. I was looking through BoxRec earlier, actually, and Thompson got a few decent paydays out of the IBO. It was obviously on the line the night he fought Sellers, and then he fought against Rothman and obviously a very inexperienced David Haye. But the interesting thing was, whenever Sellers knocked out Thompson for the IBO title, and then he fought Nelson for his WBO, Nelson knocked out Sellers, and then he refused to take the IBO title. He told the IBO to basically stick it and make it vacant.
Well, it was around the time as well where Sky were kind of pimping the IBO title, weren't they?
Yeah.
It's like every second fight was for an IBO title. I remember, not to go too off topic, but was it Joyd Kalik? Remember him?
Yes.
Yeah. He was an IBO champion, wasn't he? And there was like several fighters who had that title, but it wasn't a very prestigious belt, was it? Even though their rankings, they claim the rankings can't be manipulated because it's all based on computerized. But you had guys like Brian Nielsen being IBO champions, which kind of sums up the credibility of that belt, doesn't it?
And the thing is, I mean, everyone moans about the bouts and too many bouts, but I remember saying on the pod about someone like Brian McGee, where there was an interview with him and he had one of the WBA bouts at the time, and it enabled him to get paydays on the road. And it was the same with this bout here. These two guys were guys who didn't end their careers with millions in the bank. They didn't have for all the stuff that they did and how many times they put their bodies on the line. They didn't end, with fantastic paydays or anything like that. So this bout to them was something that was important that could enable them to maybe travel the world and get a few paydays. And, I know for someone like Ezra Sellers, he actually passed away a few years ago. And before he passed away, he got in the Florida Boxing Hall of Fame.
I'm not a big speech maker, so don't be ready for that. Don't even worry. But I just want to say thanks to my family. Their undying support has been everything to me. Several friends, Grits. I appreciate you guys. Thanks.
To us that might not be a big deal, but for someone like him who, didn't quite make it, like, obviously a lot of the stars do, it was great for him to win this fight that we're talking about and, pick that title that, a lot of fans won't think highly of. But for guys at that level and, who didn't get probably the respect that they deserve at the time, I think it's good for those type of fighters. And that's why these bouts, do have a part to play for, at a certain level.
Yeah, I think that sums it up really well, Kurt. I suppose for final closing comments from me, shame to see Sellers. I think it was a heart attack or some kind of heart problems that he passed away of a few years ago. So obviously rest in peace to him. He was a very exciting fighter, and also, as we said earlier, guys, and a very underrated, talented boxer, puncher who could hit hard and be hurt himself. But this was a fight that didn't really need any sort of title on the line. But the IBO obviously got in there, and fair play for these guys for getting their little bit of silverware. And hopefully Sellers over his career would have made a few pounds. And I know that Thompson, we see him now on Box Nation, and that he obviously made a few pounds as well. Very exciting fighter. And if Dave, Andy, if you guys wanted any closing comments.
And just to say as well, we don't see a lot of small horse shows on Sky anymore. Hearn got rid of them. They want more of the jazz of it all and all that. But this just shows that make the right fights. Doesn't matter where it's set. It could be the biggest venue or the smallest. Great fights will happen between two great fighters or styles that just blend.
Yep, good fight. As I say, it's on YouTube. It's one of the most it's what I would probably class, as it's not a hardcore favourite. It's probably more kind of class as a cult favourite, actually. Like I said, like films like Kickboxer with Jean-Claude Van Damme are like a kind of cult favourite. This fight is along those lines.
It's interesting that we're talking about Matchroom getting rid of the small hall shows. This, ironically enough, was actually a Matchroom show.
Barry Hearn.
Barry Hearn, yeah. But it was actually I think it was a midweek show as well. It wasn't a Saturday fight night. It was the midweek kind of nondescript show, and this fight just came out of the blue, and it was an absolute cracker. And as you said, Andy, kind of a cult over the years. A lot of people talk about it, but most people haven't seen it. But as I said, it's on YouTube. You have no excuse now. Go out and check it out. It's a classic.
Yeah, we always say that after every fight, obviously go and watch it, but I mean this one, 10, 12 minutes of your day, that's all it's pretty much going to take. There's a real nice, short, concise version from first bell to last on YouTube, so go out and check it out, guys. Thanks to Dave Lee there for his final thoughts, Andy, Kurt and me, Steve Wellings as well. Don't forget to check out the previous editions. We've had Lutz, Klitschko, we've had Sanchez against Azuma, Nelson, the De La Hoya, Mosley. Good few fights in the archive now, and we've got an absolute cracker middleweight classic coming up for you next week as well, which I'm sure you'll all enjoy. Thanks for continuing to listen and subscribe and spreading it around. I know people have given us some great feedback about Punches from the Past, and this series is coming to a close soon, but we'll hopefully have some more great fights to discuss in the next one. But we still have 2 or 3 left, and join us again next week, guys. Thanks, all the best.